Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
Hi, good people. Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. This is Chris Cole, and I am joined today by kind of the usual suspects, Dylan and Evan. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Howdy, howdy.
Hey, everyone. How's it going? It's your boy, Evan.
So this, and it was a lot of discussion amongst us. We actually put thought into this sometimes. This is going to be our Halloween episode. We're dropping it before Halloween, but it'll get you in the spirit. And this was kind of one of the more fun episodes that Dylan came up with. So, Dylan, do you want to go ahead and set up the fork?
Yeah, so the idea is, Orson Welles' famous radio broadcast of the War of the Worlds, the classic H.G. Wells novel about a Martian alien invasion, debuts on Halloween night on October 30th, 1938, causes this huge panic. Everybody thinks as they're listening, because back in the day, when people would listen to the radio, especially in cars or like between commercial breaks, they would flip channels. And Orson Welles' broadcast was designed as a breaking news bulletin style format. So a lot of people who missed at the beginning of the show, they introduced, hey, this is the War of the Worlds. This is a radio play. This is fiction. But you only caught that if you listened from the top. If you just were hopping around and caught bits and pieces of it, and especially because this is one of Orson Welles' early radio gigs. He's just kind of transitioned from kind of theater production over the last year or so and started switching into some of his more mainstream like radio stuff. This is before he's directing. So people, one, aren't necessarily, they might recognize Orson Welles' voice, but not necessarily. And if they're just flipped through the channels, they're going to be like, what is going on? Some people thought it was Martians. Some people thought it was the Germans, because this is right before the Munich conference. So people just didn't know what was going on. They just thought some kind of disaster was going on. So our fork for today, and full disclosure, this is going to be a wacky episode. We have done no planning. I'm running off 5 hours of sleep. I've been up since 4:30, and it is now 8:30 at night. Papa's ready for bed. This is going to be a wild and wacky Halloween episode, because our fork today is, what if during Orson Welles' broadcast of the War of the Worlds, where people think, oh God, Martians are attacking. Oh God, Martians are actually attacking. So October 30th, 1938, Mars attacks. And that's it. That's our fork. So
That's the fork.
Just to start us off, I'm going to say assuming the Martians do attack, they're probably not just going to attack New York. They're probably going to attack several different cities. I don't think this is an Independence Day thing where they have giant monoliths go over every world capital. You don't know, but I'm going to say they at least probably hit like London, New York, maybe Paris, maybe Berlin, maybe someplace out, in kind of East Asia. Don't know for sure, but that's kind of the gamut that I'm running. And then what kind of chaos ensues when Martians actually attack, when a radio broadcast is both pretending and making people think Martians are actually attacking? What kind of mass chaos is that causing first?
Yeah, because we have to remember that in the real timeline when this broadcast occurred, there were a good number of folks who believed that it was real or believed that some sort of catastrophe was happening. So I think one of the closest analogies you can get is to like something that happened in modern times is when that ballistic missile alert, the false one, was sent out to everyone in Hawaii, and the mass chaos, the mass pandemonium, just the testimonial after testimonial of people who genuinely believe that those were their final moments on Earth. That is basically probably the closest historical analogy I can find in recent memory. And, you can see what happened there. They basically shut down an entire US state. And the difference is, of course, this is an official government notification on your cell phone from an official government service. So this isn't a private company. This was, had a lot of weight and credence behind it because it's an official government broadcast. While this doesn't necessarily have the same weight, and historically there's a bunch of like apocryphal accounts of like people who had a heart attack and died because of panic, or they killed themselves or whatever. Like, none of that, as far as I'm aware, is actually proven. In the research I've done, the little research I did, about this topic, is that there were people who did believe this was real, who, they called into the radio station, they complained, they were calling friends, and you started to have this sort of telephone tag effect where you had a friend of a friend who heard from somebody who listened to the radio broadcast. They're getting second, third, fourth hand information. Before the age of social media, this spread like wildfire. And I don't have the numbers in front of me of like how many people who actually listened to this, and then how far this actually spread. But, it did become decently widespread. Like, I believe it was something, and Dylan, maybe you can find the numbers or correct me on this, but it's something in the tune of like maybe 6 million people heard some sort of piece of the broadcast.
Yeah.
And like 1.8 to 2 million people might have believed it was a real thing. It was something like that. So we're not talking like by any means a majority of the country, but we are talking about a sizable portion of the population that are probably, having very mixed reactions to this. And whether it's panic, whether it's, okay, I'm just going to get out my lawn chair, crack open a cold one, and wait for the end of the world to happen. We have a sizable portion of the population that believes things are going down, and then things actually do go down. So this produces several questions in my mind. How sentient do we believe these attacking Martians are? Do they have their own language? Do they have their own, I'm sure they have their own advanced technology and everything like depicted in the novel. Do they even try to communicate with us, or are they just coming in? So anyway, I started blasting. Like, is their goal complete world domination? Are they just trying to enslave us? Like, I'm going to get off my soapbox here for a second because I'm actually trying to critically think about what's going to be an incredibly wacky episode to begin with. But like, if you also, for the listeners who are still somehow listening at this point, another Halloween themed episode that we did many years back, the original show starter, Don Shelley, did an excellent episode on, I think he called it the Dead Presidents Society.
Yeah.
It's very similar to this sort of wacky thread where he basically imagined this technology that would like bring back, resuscitate, and keep former dead presidents alive. And they become like this sort of Disney attraction kind of thing. It's a really interesting episode, and it's one that I did not personally think I would enjoy that much just because the premise is so insane. But he actually did, in my view, a pretty good job of coming up with some interesting things that would be a result of that. So I would say just kind of check your hyper analytical, inner historian at the door a little bit and come alongside us for a Fork in Time's wild ride, just to spitball a little bit, just to kick the can around a little bit and see where things go from this.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and say I don't think it's going to be like Independence Day style resource extraction, just harvest the planet. I am going to say I'm just going to say, for the sake of atmosphere, we don't know exactly what the Martians want because they're not going to communicate with us, because this is kind of a middle of the night surprise. This is like a Pearl Harbor style attack, but on the entire planet. So I suspect we're not really going to understand exactly what they're, at least at first, we're not going to understand what they're going for. We might figure it out at some point later. But like on the night of October 30th and a couple days afterwards, I at least imagine, first there's going to be kind of mass chaos. Then, New York Harbor probably is going to have at least some gunboats in it, some Coast Guard military stuff, because at this point they were already kind of sort of on the watch for tensions about to break out in Europe. So probably some security around there, but New York may have a little bit of fighting. Berlin is probably going to put up the stiffest resistance. Let me just guess at that. Just in terms of, uniforms and guns already being on premises.
I don't know.
Oh no, because they're going to be on the Czech border.
Right. They just got done annexing the Sudetenland. They're going to be down there. I mean, if you remember historically, like Germany has enough, as you said, guns and uniforms for one front.
Yeah.
At a time. Those are on the Czech border right now.
So do the Germans hightail it back to Berlin?
So they have to hightail it back, possibly. And I mean, keep in mind in the novel, like any sort of, as far as I'm aware, any sort of military defenses that we try to put up just get, they just get eviscerated, essentially. Yeah. They get shredded. So they get about as shredded as a CVS or C does when I get home from CVS. The defenses pretty much melt about as fast as, the current state of insert your favorite NFL football team's defenses here. Like, it's not gonna fly. It's not gonna work. Like the Dallas Cowboys defense. Sorry, America's team, but the military is probably going to fold as quickly as your defense. So,
in fact, I'm pretty sure the 1930s were the one. I want to make a joke about that being the last time the Cowboys won anything.
Well, it sure feels like it. I think the Cowboys last won the Super Bowl before I was born.
That's a true story. The Cowboys did not exist when this happened.
Right, exactly. So I think the only football teams that existed at this point are like the original Cleveland Browns. I don't even know.
Packers.
Yeah, Packers.
All right, we're not getting into it.
I was going to say, what I'm hearing is the Martians get distracted by the great game of football and the invasion's over.
Yeah, exactly. But like, and this is just kind of what I'm trying to wrap my mind around is, we don't know what their intentions are. They just start attacking things. The defenses that our counterattack is not working. So I think a lot of what is going to pan out from this, and also what we're taking out from this as a variable is that the Martians get, basically Columbian exchanged, and they just die because of our, microbes and viruses. So we're assuming that they don't. We're assuming that they're still able.
We'll
to
say Martians at least have spacesuits or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Our bacteria and biological hazards don't affect their systems.
Yeah.
I mean, we have seen evidence of, microbial life, I'm pretty sure, like ancient microbial life, I should say, not current microbial life, but ancient microbial life on Mars. Now, some debate whether or not that's because maybe our spaceships brought it there and we just see it as evidence of ancient microbes, but I digress. We'll give the Martians immunity some way, somehow.
Yeah.
So,
I do think probably, if the Martians are coordinating a giant, like multi-city attack, I think you're right, Evan, that like the first line of defense is just going to get shredded. Like basically all of the kind of first order cities of the world are going to be either obliterated or completely under the Martian thumb. So that, just to list some, that's New York, probably DC, Berlin, Paris, London, a few others that you throw in there. But, maybe after a couple of weeks, you start. Basically, I think all the resistance is going to disappear out into kind of the heartland areas. It's going to disperse and deconcentrate, because what they need is a level of consistent resistance, not mass resistance, because
becomes guerrilla warfare tactics more likely.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, like,
I mean, not to get too much too modern of politics, but perhaps we get conspiracies about Jewish space lasers like 80 years early.
Not the reference I was expecting to get in this podcast, but I see what you mean.
No, like
No,
exactly.
you're right.
Like
It's just,
Hitler says, "Hey guys, look, we're on the precipice of the Third Reich becoming a huge thing," and then all of a sudden, this massive coordinated Martian attack comes in. Jewish space lasers, anyone? He always will find a way to blame the Jews. Just saying.
Yeah. Somehow the Soviet Union is going to find a way to make this the Martians a symbol of the workers' revolution taking down the capitalist and industrial world.
No, I actually think this is the perfect example of what both countries did, which is the Third Reich is going to blame it on the Jews. The Soviet Union is going to find a way to blame it on the capitalist urbanites, which is kind of coded for who they see as the Jews.
Yeah.
Both of them are going to wind up blaming the same people.
Yeah, which is interesting to think because it kind of just speaks to what, ideologically humans are predisposed to do. Like we're predisposed to just find whatever happens and use it as a way to validate our own preconceived notions or biases, confirmation bias, basically, which is really interesting to think because, anybody listening to this might be like, the premise of this is crazy to begin with, but like, when you actually try to think of how real people would respond to this, like, I just think it's interesting to think about the idea that really it would be a lot of more of the same, like with what these ideologies are built on. And we just throw in some massive, crazy curveball like this. And they're still going to find a way to, this reminds me of the Simpsons episode where they're talking about elections and why third parties don't work in America, and you literally have like two space aliens who are trying. Yeah, you get what I'm going with this. Is like somebody's like, well, I want to vote for a third party. I don't like either of you guys. You guys are aliens. You guys are terrible for us. And they just use a lot of the logic that is, of course, used by the two major parties against third parties to make the point that, the satirical point is that our system is terrible and it would be better if we opened up to more competition. Because really, when you have two major political parties, like George Washington warned about in his, outgoing State of the Union address, you just have this tribalism. You have politicians who are corrupt, who are looking out for their own interests. They're not looking out for the interests of the country. So I think that would be interesting to see, like the Nazis blaming the Jews, the communists blaming the bourgeois, and, probably just like people in more free democratic countries like the United States. Also probably, Americans by and large tend to be somewhat of a, if not a very conspiracy theory oriented bunch. And so seeing again that this can be used as evidence of, the communists are trying to take over, the Nazis are trying to take over, the Democrats are doing this, the Republicans are doing this, instead of actually like just trying to put aside differences and like actually fix the ongoing Martian invasion. That would be
I think this
to
is,
see.
And because some astute listeners may be pointing out that, this is dangerously getting close to Harry Turtledove's World War series. I'm going to say that the Martians are somewhere in terms of our kind of gamut of power here. They're somewhere above the World War aliens who somehow can't manage to keep Stalin and Hitler on opposite sides and somehow magically make them team up. But they're not as powerful as the Independence Day super death beam laser aliens. They're somewhere kind of in that middle ground, I think. I think there's going to be some way to fight back. Like what I'm imagining, mostly just because the sheer ridiculousness of this would be like trying to, fire a pop gun at a main battle tank, is I picture the Nazis somehow speeding up the process of both the Schwer Gustav and the Bismarck, both of which were already in production, but not completed for another couple of years. Mostly because I just want to picture Hitler trying to shoot a giant railway gun at a Martian spaceship, and then immediately imagine how that just completely does not go well for him. But I do think it's interesting because other people, like especially in the Americas where we have so much territory and we have enough dispersed industrial capability, I can almost see at least some of the more industrial powers that aren't quite as heavily concentrated industry trying to go for that kind of wacky stuff, at least to try and take down the spaceships, like literally straight out of like Hitler's playbook, like a 3-story tall tank with, you know, a 6-foot wide gun barrel and things like that.
I mean, we could see sooner development of like, you know, Wolfenstein style weaponry.
Yeah,
That, you know,
or
and then with the Nazi industrial capabilities.
They're going to dust off the CIA is going to dust off. Sorry, the CIA didn't exist yet. J. Edgar Hoover is going to dust off Nikola Tesla's old secret plans for the death ray that they killed him so that he couldn't release it. They're going to make Nikola Tesla the head of the military so that he can start testing all of his wacky experiments. And then the fight against the Martians is going to be full bore. I do think this might actually lead at least some attempt for, because when was the League of Nations disbanded? Was it 36, 37?
Yeah, let me look that up. It was somewhere in this neighborhood.
Because maybe this is what gives the League of Nations a shot in the arm. Like maybe, I was going to say maybe this leads to an earlier United Nations, but if the League of Nations...
So actually, interestingly enough, I
think it formally disbanded
operations in 1946.
Yeah, because they just literally replaced it with the UN. Yeah.
Right.
So maybe this is what gives, maybe this gives the League of Nations a shot in the arm. Woodrow Wilson comes out of his grave and is like, yes, I was right.
I don't know. Maybe. What you're also telling me is that this timeline we could have actual literal Nazi moon bases.
Let's not get too iron sky on people. We need to keep this somewhat realistic.
Yeah, exactly. Something that I'm also thinking about though is that, because you're right, Dylan, in that we have to think of, you know, and I think there are definitely ways that this attack can be, you know, at least somewhat repelled, somewhat, you know, brought to heel a little bit. I do think that like industrial ingenuity might be something to try and take out the spaceships, but I think something that we also are thinking about as well is like we put the actual attacking troops, like the ground troops, we can call them, like in spacesuits or whatever, like, because that's our way of kind of assuming that the elements on Earth aren't going to, you know, like in the War of the Worlds, you know, the microbes end up taking them out. To a certain extent, this kind of speaks to themes of, you know, like the development of modern warfare, right? Because, you know, we have, you know, no matter how technologically advanced you get, you still need to have ground troops. You still need to have a physical presence to be able to hold on to the things that you're conquering, assuming that you're not actually like just, you know, tactical nuclear weapons, you know, tactical nuking the place or different positions, you know, traditional nuclear weapons, just obliterating the place and making it a nuclear wasteland. Which, by the way, I'll put a bookmark on this. Does this mean we get a sooner Manhattan Project? Does this mean we get a sooner, you know, Nazis in the United States trying to develop nuclear weapons? I think it could, but I digress. Yeah. That's just a bookmark I want to put on that point. But, you know, the Martians are obviously going to have some sort of organized, you know, ground troops. You know, again, we don't know their objectives, but they're trying to take over certain places. I think this is just the thought that came to me. In that instance, I think they could face some resistance, stiffer resistance from perhaps an unexpected source, and that is nature itself. And when I say nature itself, I don't necessarily mean, you know, just microbes, but I think of things like try and go through the mountains of Appalachia without running into things like, you know, cougars, mountain lions, things like that. Oh, Dylan's cooking something.
Yeah,
Dylan's cooking something.
Here's the thing.
How you met Colorado.
Before we get to what are you talking about The Locust?
No, I'm talking about the greatest movie that stars both Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen. Red Dawn, baby.
Ooh.
All right. So before we get to anything else, like, hey, these alien foot troops you're talking about traversed outer space.
Well, technically, the ships traversed outer space.
Right, the ships did.
But what makes you think they're going to have to slog through Appalachia to get somewhere?
Well, and I was just using Appalachia as an example of like
but
a
what
place.
makes you think they're going to have to like go over the surface of the earth the way we're picturing it?
So I mean, what you're saying is that, you know, they're just always going to stay in their spaceships and like, you know,
well, if they
things, taking things out.
Hey, if any area presents a problem to them, then they're just going to
wipe it
or jump over it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, but at the same time, in Evan's kind of guerrilla warfare resistance that he's talking about, you know, it is going to be places like the Appalachians, like the Rockies, that are going to be. I mean, there's a reason the U.S. government has Cheyenne Mountain in you know, underneath a mile of rock. I mean, look at, you know, and again, we try not to get too political on this podcast, but this is just an obvious recent reference to something like this. When the U.S. Just dropped the bunker buster bomb that we had literally never used, the largest bomb we have in our arsenal, and it was debatable whether it did anything to take out, you know, that's kind of the questions that we're getting at.
Here's the thing, Dylan. Does Romania have that kind of technology today? No. Because in 1939, the United States military was smaller than Romania's. So let's get our mind wrapped around what the United States military were talking about it.
Well, I'm talking about the Martian military. I'm not talking about the United States military. I'm talking about from a resistance standpoint, going to inhospitable, remote, hard to attack places like you know, mountainous regions. That is going to provide a strategic advantage that at least, I won't say counters, but at least helps negate some of, this giant Martian spaceship is going to just bomb us to smithereens from above.
I mean, do we have like a 2012 like scenario where the entire world, you know, in that one, it's the entire world gets flooded and it's just Mount Everest that, you know, stands above everything else? Do we have a somewhat similar scenario where we have humanity, you know, going to these sort of very inhospitable remote areas to somehow try to either just survive or form some sort of resistance counterattack? Like, because again, we're just assuming that these aren't completely unbeatable, but with the level of technology that we have in 1938, I mean, even with the level of technology that we're talking about in the modern world, like, we would have a difficult time with this. So I'm just trying to kind of figure out, if we don't know motive or we don't figure it out, then what's to necessarily stop, besides just raw time itself? Like, what's going to necessarily stop an eventual? It's like, I'm going to drop a very deep cut reference here to something that I haven't thought about this in literal eons, but I have a set of books still in my closet, and I forget what they're called, but they're basically like a kind of like a children's encyclopedia. And it goes into this mathematical proof, quote unquote. I put it in heavy air quotes because obviously it's not an actual mathematical proof, but, you know, just follow me for sake of argument. It basically talks about how, and it proves that vampires cannot exist on the basis of exponents, right? Because if you have one vampire and they bite one person, then you have two vampires. Two vampires bite four, and it just keeps doubling and doubling and doubling. So the reason why vampires cannot exist is because if they actually did exist, at this point, the entire world would be vampires within the span of a few weeks or a few months. So the argument I'm going to posit here on the basis of that is that unless we have some reason besides the Martians being defeated by microbes for them to be defeated, I don't see how this timeline would result in anything else but, you know, complete Martian takeover of the planet, which then kind of gets us back into a circular loop of what are they wanting to accomplish to begin with. But are you guys following what I'm saying?
Yeah, and one to counter your vampire point. There is a documentary that came out back in like 2010 or 2012.
No,
you may have
Abraham Lincoln.
No,
Vampire Slayer.
no. That's not the one I was going for. Ethan Hawke is in this one. In when the whole world gets turned into vampires, some people can unvampire. It's called Daywalkers. You know, it's a great documentary. You should watch it. But that answers that question.
Yeah, sure.
There is also a certain geographic feature of the Earth that we don't know how the Martians are going to react to. And that is something that very much does not exist on Mars, mainly water. So we have to figure out, are Martians coming here for the water? Like, are they just going to float straight from London over the cliffs of Dover and be like, ooh, it's time to go swim and get distracted? Or are they going to be like Mel Gibson in Signs and they just literally can't touch the stuff? They're terrified of it. Either way, that presents some interesting tactical opportunities for whatever resistances can come around to either, take advantage of a Martian.
I mean, technically speaking, Mars does have
they
water.
Probably are almost exclusively focused on controlling water as an asset because it's something they don't have. If they deathly avoid water, then your 2012 hypothesis may be more accurate in the sense that it justifies me trying to make Waterworld a factual reality. And Kevin Costner just saves the human race with go-go juice from an island fortress in Hawaii.
Yeah, Dylan, I think that's a really good point that you bring up. Like I made a bleak reference to during your monologue. Mars does have water. It is all frozen in the polar ice cap, I believe, and I think there might be some on the southern end as well. And I think that's, because if we're talking about Mars, I have to throw Elon Musk into this. A big part of what Elon Musk wants to do to make Mars inhabitable is basically melt the polar ice caps and, create an atmosphere that would be more conducive. Because if I remember correctly, the atmospheric composition of Mars is like, you know what? Before I completely speak out of turn, I'm going to look this up, but I'm just going to leave what I said for you guys to discuss, is this idea that Mars has water, but it's in frozen form. And so, Dylan, I think you do provide a good point of how would they react to water? What do they want with the water? Does it kill them? Does it provide difficulty? Could humanity, be able to essentially create like these, almost sea land like fortresses per se? Because, you don't really want to have a ton of land because that's something that they can obviously just obliterate or come in and invade. But if you have some sort of, or like, I don't know, German U-boats, like submarine warfare. I don't know.
Are we literally talking about like every elementary school boy's dream every summer of fighting aliens with water guns? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
They're gonna take the Schwergustav. The Americans are gonna they're gonna bring Guillermo Marconi out of the grave to figure out how he got those undersea electrical cables, greatly widen the diameter. They're gonna make the largest hose in the world. They're gonna hook it up to the Schwergustav, and that's gonna shoot water at the spaceships.
I mean, by the way, I'm just picturing if biologically the aliens are in Hydras.
Because there has to be some reason why they haven't melted the water on Mars.
Right. There has to be. And just so I can throw this in here, as a statement of fact, Mars is 95% carbon dioxide, 2.8% nitrogen, 2% argon. Earth's atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 0.04% carbon dioxide. So just on an atmospheric level, the Martians have to have spacesuits and some other thing that severely restricts their movement in order to even be able to function here. Basically, it's the equivalent of if you take off your spacesuit helmet in space or on Mars, then we as humans would immediately suffocate and die. So that's why they're attacking from their spaceships. So anyway, carry on, gentlemen.
are we talking that they bodily cannot come in contact with water?
Yeah, I think it's either that or they have an aversion because they don't know whether they can biologically come into contact with liquid water.
Okay.
Like I'm gonna assume they have a mechanism to deal with solid water, i.e., ice, because it's going to be on Mars.
Well, by the way, I think what Evan pointed out is really interesting. Also, taking water out of this, our atmosphere is an issue for them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I mean, if they're sophisticated enough to get here, they're probably sophisticated enough to at least have some ability to bring with them or fabricate, sealed shelter on the ground.
Yes.
But I don't think they're going to have like giant terraforming furnaces straight out of StarCraft to like put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We already are good enough at that ourselves. We don't need any help. Thank you.
I mean, the interesting thing, just thinking through this, and I enjoy that we're at this point in it, because the reference from somewhat this time period is also like, normally I would cringe about mentioning it. I'm picturing the movie The Battle of the Bulge, which is just, from a real historical perspective, like Eisenhower almost came out and said it was crap. But if you're familiar with that movie, like, it centers around the Americans figuring out that the Germans are low on gas. And if in this time, in this whatever invasion, what if the humans figure out what atmosphere these aliens need? So it's not just a complete passive, we don't do anything, but what if it's hey, they have those green tanks on them at all times. Wow.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we start figuring out the Achilles heel, I think, of these seemingly impenetrable, juggernauts. We start kind of figuring that out, and whether that means we shoot giant water cannons at the spaceships, or I mean, honestly, we could just fire, and I don't know necessarily how this would work, but just follow me for sake of argument. Like, we figure out it's an atmospheric thing. We just kind of make some sort of, either just like straight up oxygen canisters or like dirty bombs. Essentially,
that's exactly where I was going to go, as a dirty bomb.
Yeah, we create some sort of dirty bomb, which, maybe for us, wouldn't be necessarily as lethal, but for the Martians, it would be game over. Like, as soon as we are able to lob it, like, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 4, the little.
It's just like Bullseye and Womp Rats in my T-16 back home.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, have the hillbillies of Appalachia manning the turrets,
Well, actually, it's funny that you mentioned Elon Musk in this episode earlier, because I just had an idea, and it combines most of all the dumb side references we have made in this episode so far.
And keep in mind, I'm trying to stuff as many as I can.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Because there's so many things about aliens in pop culture that I feel like we are not referencing. And I'm sure our audience, if they've listened to this point, are going to be dutiful to remind us of that fact. So I'm just trying to stuff as many as I can.
Yeah. So here's my theory. I've already mentioned the swear Gustav. It's a giant railway gun. What we need to punch a hole in the ship, the Martian spaceship, so that it depressurizes and exposes their interior to our atmosphere, because they're not going to be wearing spaceships inside. So
that's where I was going. Yeah.
Here's where the Musk family comes in. Elon Musk is from South Africa. His father famously,
diamond tip,
diamond slug.
Okay.
A giant diamond slug shell from African mines in a German gun, with American logistics getting it from one place to the other. and a diamond is basically the hardest material known to man, at least as in the 1930s. So all they have to do is they don't even have to get a solid chunk of diamond. They can just, if they can get enough mass of it together into a slug that they can fit inside, a battleship cannon, the Schwer-Gustav, potentially even a decently sized main battle tank. And they can figure out how to get that, or even Werner von Braun comes back in. He gets his rockets a little early. That I think is the tool that I was going to say Americans just by default, but the humanoids can use against the Martians, because if they can start puncturing holes in the spaceships, that immediately takes the largest tactical imbalance at least somewhat out of the way and forces, whatever Martians are already on the ground to engage in a more kind of standard traditional ground occupation / assault. And at that point, that's when the parody starts to come back.
The parody is going to come back at that point because, we as humans are very well versed in killing each other for thousands upon thousands of years of human history. We know how to kill things. We know how to exterminate organic life forms. So when the fight becomes much less against massive, unknown, metallic spaceship entities, which also, by the way, if we have like the gas canisters, dirty bombs, whatever, that can depressurize them. Also, just the fact if we get water in there too, just on a very basic level, water and electronic components do not mix very well. So that's also something that we could use to our advantage as well. But kind of just starting to draw this wackier episode to a close, because, I don't think this is something that we are going to be able to have an hour and 15 minutes long, multi-part mother of all series, like we had before with the Little Brothers Club. But if we start gaining some sort of tactical parity with the Martians, where do we end up seeing this assault actually going? Do they just kind of retreat? Do they go away? Come back another day sort of thing? How does this change? Because at this particular point, we are right about to start World War II. But I believe, despite a little bit of what I said earlier of like how humans are going to respond to this with their preconceived ideas and notions and confirmation biases, I do think we've sketched out a humanoid response in the end where most of us, as, again, the human race, are unified to fight off this threat, almost on the level of a, post 9/11 response, where we all agreed that invading Iraq was a great thing. And again, not to get too much into politics, but despite the fact that Iraq wasn't even involved, despite the fact that it was some people that were funded by the Saudis who actually did this, and we look into the actual official 9/11 report, Saddam didn't have WMDs, all this stuff. There's no mistaking that this is a extraterrestrial Martian threat that, we paired German engineering and, American scientific know-how, put together to save Homo sapiens, to save the planet Earth. Chris, I can tell is going to have a different take on this. Yeah. But where I'm going with this is it may forestall some of the issues that were developing and had developed up until that point. But like we as the human race often like to do, we often forget about things very quickly. A lot of us have the collective memory of a goldfish, where we're like, okay, we fixed that problem. We banded together to fix those problems. Now what were we fighting about again? Let's just get back to what we were doing, back to our regularly scheduled programming, right?
Given that South Africa is Commonwealth,
mm-hmm.
I don't see why they need the Germans.
Because they have the big gun. And it's already mostly built. That's the only reason.
I am unconvinced that Britain feels the need to use Germany's big gun. Like, they were almost at war. The United States wants nothing to do with anyone else. How, like, realistically, I don't know how quickly this, like, human confederation happens, and I don't know how much we trust each other.
I mean, at this particular point in history, I don't necessarily think you're too far off base. I don't necessarily know if that's completely off, inaccurate.
And I think what you might see is weirdly kind of what the Soviet Union was doing between 1939 and 1941, which is just, I'm not involved in this. I'm going to let you guys kill each other. So a United States handles it our way. Great Britain and the British Empire might go this diamond route. Germany can't. The Soviet Union would probably handle it similar to the United States, which is, we'll just run. Like, we don't need, we've got a lot of space. And so I think it might wind up that, like, you want to be a Martian occupying Central Europe because they don't effectively fight back. And Martian and the United States would kind of take this attitude of, listen, we took care of our Martian problem. I don't know what you guys are going to do now, but we'll shoot anybody that comes close to us.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that being a thing. We see, and a lot of this heavily depends on the specific cities that are hit. But like, if we assume what we kind of said at the beginning of this episode, New York, Paris, Berlin, some other major population centers or cities, I think it is very possible that, the still isolationist Americans look at this and we're like, hey, perfect. Problem solved. We didn't have to do anything. We fixed our own problem. You guys deal with your own issues.
In the immortal words of a president 80 years in the future. No, sorry, 60 years in the future. Mission accomplished.
Actually, it might be a way the United States attacks this. And because let's face it, it wouldn't be an episode of A Fork in Time if I didn't bring up economic theory. Export whatever solutions we develop to get ourselves out of the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, 100%. But I could see a lot of Europe just kind of looking at this and being like, oh, cool, the Martians did the work against Hitler and the Nazis that we didn't have to do. Like, now if we're talking about, like if there was a different government in charge, let's say in Germany at this point, I think there might have been a much different response. But given that these are the literal Nazis that we're talking about, and they're having their problems having to deal with this, I think a lot of Europe is just kind of looking at this and like backing away slowly. And they're just like, yeah, we don't have to deal with you guys anymore. Perfect. I still struggle to see, though, and this will probably just be my final thought on the subject, unless I think of any sort of other wacky Futurama reference I can somehow worm in here. The whole world shall learn of our peaceful ways by force. But I don't, while I do agree a lot with what you said, Chris, I do think that an event of this magnitude, I struggle to see how it wouldn't produce at least some sense of collective humanity or some sense of a post 9/11 response. I think the aftermath might be affected by realpolitik quite substantially, but I think in the moment, there might be a little bit more of that unifying factor.
The thing is, amongst the two main ascendant ideologies, both saw the other as an existential threat to their existence. Germany and the Soviet Union saw each other as existential threats.
Mm-hmm.
They saw each other just like they would see these aliens. One and the same. So they don't make much of a distinction there.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, I guess I say if you have a even more existential threat that threatens to wipe out both sides and, capitalism. It threatens to wipe out everybody. I mean, if there's not something that wouldn't produce some degree of unity between people to be like, okay, we'll stop fighting each other, we'll take care of these guys, and then we'll get back to killing each other. I mean, I'm not really sure what is. I'm not sure what would do that.
So basically, I guess after an hour of talking about it, almost, it sounds like we don't really have a good way to completely beat back the Martians. It sounds like everybody's going to kind of do their own thing. We may develop some strategies for countering them, but we're not going to have a kind of Independence Day style, dramatic, we beat them, they're going to go back home, rah, 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 wave the flags. Will Smith punches an alien in the face. Everybody's happy and goes home until the sequel 20 years later that we don't think about because they miscast almost everybody. It's not where I expected us to end up after an hour. I was expecting more Red Dawn, Independence Day style, good vibes, explosions, and saving the day. But I do think it's more realistic. I do have one final thought that I will throw in there. I do think if we realize that, or if the Martians realize that, okay, the Earthlings do have at least some capability to fight back, I do think that there's at least going to be some transit back home, whether that's for repairs, whether that's for exchange of material to swap troops in and out or whatever. It's going to be something. I have one last off the wall rock to drop. I'm going to say that the Martians are going to take I'm going to call him a goodwill ambassador back home with them. I'm going to say Trotsky decides to make not just a world permanent revolution, a galactic permanent revolution. Because he knows that the only place he can't get ice picked in the head, where Stalin can't get to him, is on a Martian spaceship. So Trotsky's going to go to Mars, and then the Martians are going to go communist. And that's our episode, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to A Fork in Time.
Yeah, you'll love to see it.
I didn't say it had to make sense. I just said it was one last...
totally not Googling possible UFO cults in the 1930s at this time to see if maybe there's a more suitable ambassador in the end. I did technically lie and say I had one last thought. This will be probably my truest last thought on the matter. And that is, I think what we've created is a world that makes very much sense with the Martians attacking at this particular point in history. I think if we talk about, more modern history, Independence Day, sort of Red Dawn sort of scenario, I think would be much more realistic. But also, let's just take the simple facts that NATO exists, for example. Yes. Right? If NATO exists and aliens attack a NATO country,
Article 5 comes in.
Article 5 comes in immediately. We're all in this together. So, I think it's definitely not exactly where I would necessarily have thought we would take this either. But hey, for a very fun, very wacky episode, I'm happy with what we were able to create.
Chris, any final thoughts? Any more economic theory to throw at us?
No, I can't after, we've talked. They have ice picks on Mars. Ice picks is actually the one, they have ice on Mars.
They have ice.
I can't.
All right, remember it, folks. I have somehow managed to make Chris Coppola speechless. After years of trying, it finally happened. So I think now that we've officially, as Trotsky's nemesis Stalin would say, squeezed all the blood from this particular weird and wild turnip, I think we're going to leave you for today. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you have thoughts, I'm sure you'll have thoughts about this episode.
I'm sure you'll have thoughts on this.
Any other episodes in particular, feel free to leave them in the Discord or in the Spotify comments on your podcast player of choice. If you have any other ideas for topics, preferably slightly more grounded than this one, but this is a kind of Halloween episode, so we gave ourselves a little slack. Feel free to throw them at us in the Discord or in a comment. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful Halloween. May you all have entirely too many pieces of candy and entirely too few cavities. And from that, I say our official final goodbye. Gentlemen, if you should come across a fork in time, what should you do?
Take it.
I think you should take it and make it a spork.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.